Okay.
Okay, what? Okay, start my 30 seconds?
Yeah, we're good. No, you can start talking now. We're good.
Oh, like we're here and we're live?
Yes, we're live.
Hi, everybody.
Oh my God.
For the second time tonight, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We got a good show planned for you. Mike Keefe is here, and he knows what he's doing. So he's not going to be part of the blooper reel, we hope. We're going to be, somebody's got a feedback coming in.
No, I fixed it. It was me. Go ahead.
Okay. We're going to be talking about electronic-assisted astronomy tonight. It's important in this age of COVID-19 that we all do our social distancing stuff. And so we can't do some of the things we used to be able to do. And that's unfortunate. But it's made us be creative and do some other things with our astro imaging. Now, before we started the show, we asked ourselves, we were talking in the room here, and we had ourselves a little argument, as we often do, about whether EAA is imaging or not. And the answer is yes, it's imaging. But it's imaging with a different purpose. It's not the same imaging that you might find in cloudy nights on the beginning and intermediate astro imaging forums or on the CCD and CMOS forums. It's not the kind of stuff that you post a lot of pictures on AstroBin for. Most of those pictures are deep space images. There's also planetary imaging, solar imaging, stuff like that. But the point is, those are images taken with long exposure cameras, tracking, guiding, and all sorts of stuff going on. There's a whole other way of doing it. And that whole other way involves taking pictures while you're sitting there and replacing an eyepiece, a visual eyepiece that you look through, replacing it with a camera. And that camera can build up the exposure over the time and display it on a screen. And that screen can be used if the public is there. They can be looking at the screen monitor with you, and you can be pointing out things as you go. Or that screen can capture the image, and you can process it if you want. Well, Michael Keefe is going to be here.
Hold on a second. Molly, can you mute your mic on this one?
Yeah, sorry.
That's nicer. Thank you, Tolga. So my point being is that EAA is imaging. Now, on cloudy nights, there's a specific prohibition against EAA being posted there if you're processing the image. Well, that makes sense, but it makes sense for cloudy nights because they're trying to keep their forums straight. If you're processing the image, you can do all the things that Mike's going to tell you about tonight, get the great data, and then sit down and process it all you like. But once you start processing it, it's no longer using it as electronic-assisted astronomy. It's now using it as deep space imaging, and you belong over in one of the other forums over there. So before we get going there, I want to take you, share a screen a little bit now, present now, and my entire screen. And okay, we're going to go over here to, I want to show you that the calendar's bringing up. I think is it next week already that we're starting with Stella from AABSO, and then Ellie will be here the week after that, Linda, and then Carrie Ann. We've got 4 women coming up on a row, and we're actually kind of proud of that because we need to be more diverse. If you folks know some people who are not the typical old gentleman farts, we want to hear from them too. We want to expand our reach. We want to expand our representation of astro imaging. We've got a lot of people. We've got a good, strong list of people coming on to present for us. And we're glad that a lot of them represent something besides what we consider the traditional realm of astro imaging. After that, Brent Maynard is coming to tell us about astropixel processing, and Andy's Astro will be here telling us about creating dramatic images. Amy is coming up in late October. We got a couple of blanks there, and we got some other people. We got them dangling on the hook coming up for you. So we're trying to organize the best shows we can for you. we strongly recommend that you hit this contact button and you come on over here and tell us your name and tell us that you want to do some kind of a show. uh, all you got to do is love what you're doing and have some technical competence as far as putting together a PowerPoint show or something like that. We really appreciate it if you do that. We want to make this representative of everybody out there doing astroimaging. So please join us. And of course, let me see, where are we? There's a lot of stuff to do with on YouTube. Over here, you'll see places that you can comment when you go over to our YouTube ask us questions and things like that. You'll find places to sign up for subscriptions. And what are we up to? 9.35. So 9,350 we were the other day. And we were creeping up ever so gradual. We want to get to 10,000. So please like, subscribe, and do all that other stuff. Okay, so much for preliminaries. We got 66 people, and they didn't come to hear the introductory stuff. Michael Keefe, are you ready to take over, my man?
I certainly am.
Okay, it's yours.
All righty. Thank you so very much. So let me tell it to present. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. And we'll get this slideshow going. And swap that. So yeah, thank you very much. Going to be talking about EAA, or electronically assisted astronomy, and in many circles that has evolved from something called video astronomy. And sometimes you hear people use those terms interchangeably, although video astronomy is a little bit kind of out of favor, especially with the technology moving on so much. But just a little bit about me. I am, as of 2018, a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador. Basically, volunteer work through NASA in terms of just educating the public on space exploration, what NASA does, astronomy, that sort of thing. So it really helps kind of feed that passion. I am just a boring finance and accounting guy by day, but my passion in life really comes from astronomy. Um, I am in the Raleigh Astronomy Club. Quick shout out, I saw one of our former members, Michael Kidd, somewhere in the listing, so shout out to him. Um, but really, astronomy has been something I've been passionate about almost all my life. It's only been since about 2003 that I actually was using equipment to look at the sky, but I've always been passionate about it ever since as a young kid. I remember staying home from school sick, trying to watch the first space shuttle launch. Um, but yeah, and as part of this astronomy passion, it's also sharing it with others. And I find that so many other people in the hobby have that same sort of passion, and have YouTube shows and anything. It's just whatever it takes to share that passion. So, again, hopefully like minds here. So we'll jump in. We'll briefly cover what EAA is and all the controversy that is surrounding that. Well, why do it? We'll talk a little bit about some of the equipment that's needed, setting some expectations for it, and we'll walk through some examples. And I've got some data that I'm going to try doing a live stack for you using SharpCap, and then we'll open it up to try and answer some of the Q&A that comes through the chat sessions. So what really is it? Electronically assisted astronomy, video astronomy, whatever we want to call it. And the definitions vary. You ask 5 different amateur astronomers what EAA is, you'll get 6 different answers. But to me, and this is what I think, when it's EAA, it's about the observation. It's as Alex said, it is really about that near live view of the object, and not necessarily collecting data for later. Obviously, you can, and you can use it for processing and making some beautiful pictures afterwards. But again, instead of that eyepiece, we're using the sensitivity of a camera to really enhance your view now, and less about what you're going to do with it later. And really, it's exploiting that technology, whether it's using a camera or a night vision device. I am not familiar with the night vision devices. I've seen them, I've looked through them, they're amazing, but it is not within my budget, nor is it within my expertise at the moment. But you're going to use that camera, and in many cases now a computer, to really enhance your view of that object now. And again, most purists will say that if you post-process it, it's not EAA, it's imaging. But really, the lines are becoming so blurred at this point, especially with the equipment. So again, as noted on cloudy nights, it's an evolving subject. It is something that it is interesting. They did move the forum recently from the kind of specialty area, and now it's under astro imaging and sketching. So again, lots of changes there. So really kind of, again, is it imaging or is it observing? And you kind of, which side of the fence do you really fall on? And I say it's both. It really falls in between. It can run one way or the other. Again, it's what you're going to do with it. So many similarities with both, whether it's the equipment you're using or the fact that you're actually trying to log an observation. So I do want to touch on a brief history of video astronomy. And back in 1928, Dr. Menzel basically published this article that I have off to the right-hand side here. And it was about talking, using the emerging technology of television to broadcast views from a telescope. And I thought that was just amazing. And again, it's basically this foreshadowing of kind of what we're going to do during COVID as far as streaming views of outer space. So, but I love that little article. And then fast forward 35 some odd years. And I love this picture down here of Gil Miles from the Sydney Amateur Astronomers. He's got his Newtonian there all plugged in with a camera, and he's got basically an old black and white tube TV sitting there. So again, it's been around for quite some time. Um, in the mid 90s, a lot of the amateurs began to experiment with inexpensive CCTV surveillance cameras. There was a camera out there called Super Circuits, excuse me, PC-23, that was good for getting those solar system objects. And then in the late 1990s, we started seeing the Stella cams and the Malin cams coming out with very, very sensitive but very small chips. And in the 2000s, the innovations kept coming. We had color, we had cooling, um, and then a lot of end users started really experimenting by themselves with security surveillance cameras. The LN300 and a whole bunch of different Samsung models were quite the rage, especially kind of towards the end of the 2000s into the teens. And now we're getting larger chips, lower read noise, and the ability to use a single USB cable for control versus what we used to have. And really, the software now is allowing for much larger exposures, cleaner views, real-time enhancements. And for me, one of the huge game changers was really being able to um, actually align and take out some of the field rotation in these exposures. So a lot of great enhancements. But if we just think about the traditional or the very basic video astronomy or the EAA setup, the very easy getting started is as simple as connecting pretty much the telescope you have with one of these cameras. This is an example of an old Samsung camera. You've got a power connector, and you've got some sort of analog out um, cable going to a monitor, television, or something. That's pretty much as basic as it can get. Next step up, again, we're still looking at a somewhat basic camera, but add now the computer. You're basically taking that analog out, using a video grabber, and then pushing it to the computer. Again, you still have to have your power to run the camera. Now I would say the majority of what we're doing with EAA now is really using, um, CMOS cameras, all running off of just a single USB. Unless you've got cooling, then you need some power, and it's all going into the computer. And this is a bit more of an advanced setup nowadays. But again, you can use it with pretty much every or any telescope that you have. So there's our brief history, but why in the world would we want to do this? Um, and again, it's about really increasing the light grasp. So I've got this picture here. This is actually a sketch taken from a gentleman that lives out in West Virginia using a 14-inch SCT under some pretty dark skies, and he's sketched out M57. Yet with, and this is mine with my older camera, and here we have a scenario where I've taken, in essence, tried to get the same exact field of view with my 11-inch SCT under not as dark skies. And what you can see visually, the basically the smallest or the dimmest object um, that Michael was able to sketch is basically this star at about 15.3. Yet, if we look at on the EAA capture, what I could find as the dimmest object in this picture was this particular star at 18.45 magnitude. So, and again, this was taken from a place not too, that's where my local club observes. So again, you can really increase the grasp, the light grasp of your telescope. Um, it's also helpful for overcoming light pollution. This is a Cloudy Nights user. This was taken from Greater London. So we're talking some horrible light pollution. And in 100 seconds, using his 12-inch SCT, he's got a beautiful picture of the Ring Nebula. I've been able to do some amazing outreach from downtown Raleigh showing the Ring Nebula in full color to passersby. So again, it can do quite a bit to help overcome light pollution in terms of using it for observing purposes. And it cannot be understated that it is a phenomenal outreach tool. Um, I love some of these examples, and I took these pictures down, or I took them from Cloudy Nights. We've got in the top right photograph, we've got someone looking at the moon, and they're using a projector to basically show that on the ground. Um, Going clockwise, then we've got a looks like a Next Star 8 with a small projector on it, projecting the Orion Nebula down onto their driveway. And then this is an example, and this was very early on in my starting with the EAA. But here we are at a plaza in between, next to one of the museums in downtown Raleigh. And I'm showing the Orion Nebula on a 32-inch TV to passersby. And this was a Stellacam 3 mono chromatic camera that I had literally just learned how to use a couple nights before. So this was probably, I think, around 2010, 11 when I took this photograph. But again, it makes for a phenomenal outreach tool. There are many other reasons as well. It does allow the enjoyment of our hobby to those that have any sort of visual impairments or aging eyes. I found that children love doing this. It is something that kids can have a very difficult time trying to look through an eyepiece. If you try, it's around that kind of kindergarten, first grade type age. They're finally able to master some of those fine motor skills where they can actually, try and get their eye over the eyepiece instead of it constantly hitting right smack dab, the bridge of their nose. And you can enjoy those images in color rather than shades of grays. It allows you to do internet broadcasts and virtual star parties. It would help if I spelled parties correctly. And it's something that can be used for remote control viewing. It definitely absolutely captures photons more effectively than the human eye. And like we mentioned earlier, you can get those deep space objects with a smaller aperture telescope. Um, and the one thing I really enjoy, and I do tend to do a lot of the astronomical leagues observing clubs, but I can go out and I can view dozens of objects in an evening and still get at least a nice picture or screenshot of them in one single evening. And as we've mentioned before, it makes for, especially in these times, it makes for a great way to do socially distant astronomy. I know I, for one, doing an outreach event in the future, whenever that happens, I'm not so sure how comfortable I'm going to have, with people coming up and actually touching my scope and putting their eye on it. I'd much rather them, look at an image from a few feet away that's on a computer monitor. So again, we'll see what happens in that space, but it definitely can't be understated. Now, there are some drawbacks to doing EAA. Depending upon your setup, it can definitely be more difficult to set up, operate, and take down. As with imaging, cables, and more cables. You've got to bring out the monitor. You've got to bring out extra equipment, especially batteries and so forth. Obviously, the use of projectors, monitors, laptops, that really does produce problematic stray light. Um, and I think it's very important to make sure that we do practice that good astro neighbor behavior. And I've got a slide in the coming up that talks about some really good ways to combat that, what I call light trespass. It's something that definitely more can go wrong with such a setup than if you're strictly viewing with an eyepiece. This is definitely something that falls in line with imaging. There's always something. And no matter how good your setup, there's always that one cable that you left or something that you plugged into the wrong port on your USB hub. So yeah, definitely a lot more can go wrong. And there can be a steep learning curve, especially with some of the supporting software. But I have found that the key to overcoming those things is several nights of experimentation, and my rule is always stick to one variable. In other words, only change one thing at a time, practice it, get it down pat, and then move on to the next variable. Changing more than one thing becomes a real hassle. So what equipment do you need? Cameras. Mentioned that most important thing. That camera is going to generate that live or near real-time view, or that night vision device. Traditionally, the cameras have been CCD cameras, upgraded from low light security cameras, pretty much analog out. But really, these more advanced and more sensitive CCD cameras are now becoming much more common. But for the most part, CMOS cameras have almost totally taken over. Um, DSLRs, even webcams, even smartphones are options. But again, I think the vast majority of the EAA hobby is transitioning over to CMOS cameras. Definitely much more simple to use, kind of full USB control. Um, we are starting to see cameras, larger pixels, low noise chips, um, and as part of that movement, we are seeing kind of much larger, uh, megapixels, better resolution. But with that comes reduced sensitivity and therefore increasing exposures. So um, the technology and the options are evolving very, very quickly. I even hate to speculate to provide any sort of recommendations. Oftentimes, I say go with what you got, play around with it, and then if it's something that is something that's very interesting and you're enjoying it, then consider taking the next step. But yeah, what I tell you is great 2 years ago is now obsolete. So again, cameras can have very, very specific designs and uses, whether they're planetary cameras, brighter DSOs, solar, etc. Um, and as long as it's a camera, and this is a very large generalization, but you're going to be able to do a great job in EAA as long as your camera and whatever software you're using, you can enhance the integration time, or you can control the exposure time, integration time. You can balance the color, increase, decrease the gain, or gamma. But once you're able to control those functions within a camera, that takes you really to the next level as far as EAA versus a webcam or potentially just an iPhone. But those are still viable options. So my preference ultimately, if you're just starting or unsure um, about whether it's something that is for you, go cheap, go simple. A CCD camera like the Revolution 2 kit pretty much is great. I think these sell for, the whole kit and caboodle is, including the monitor, I think is about $300. You don't need a computer, but it tends to be lower resolution. And I've got a older sort of version of that here. Um, you've got a analog out, you've got a power, and then you've got a control um, hand controller to basically mess with all the internal features of the camera. Um, it's great. I was able to cut my teeth on it, and it worked. That particular manufacturer is no longer in business. The Revolution 2 is very, very similar to that. But I ultimately wanted to get a higher resolution picture. I didn't like the blocky stars, and just for some reason, getting obviously a camera. It's using a sensor, so it's capturing the data digitally. Then it would turn it to an analog out, and then I would then grab it with the frame grabber and turn it back into digital. And I thought that was just kind of a waste, and certain anomalies are introduced into that digital to analog to digital process. So I definitely wanted to up the ante a bit. So um, I'm using a ZWO CMOS camera. Um, in this scenario, you've got to use a computer and software. You do get that higher resolution, but you've got to do longer exposures. I find that a cooled camera really, really helps out. And it's, for me, living on the East Coast in North Carolina, we can get some muggy nights. But even when it's not muggy, I actually like to keep the camera cool to the same temperature, no matter what the season is, because then I only need one library of darks, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in Sharp Cap. So I use a ZWO ASI 385 MC cooled. I bought it back in 2018 when it was fairly new, and even now it's been replaced by something newer. So at least it's no longer an active product from ZWO. But I would say whatever you choose, do your research and try and match your scope, your optical train, and your camera, just so it's you've got the right sampling. So you're not oversampling, you're not undersampling. You've got a camera that meets the overall focal length requirements of what you're using. So as long as you hit that, you should be pretty good. Well, telescopes. Just about any camera can do it, as long as that telescope will reach focus with your camera. It'll work. Aperture is much less important in EAA than focal ratio. Again, getting the focal ratio correct for your camera, that really makes things a lot easier. And just like in astrophotography, the shorter the focal length, the faster the scope, the faster you're going to get those images. Uh, EAA tends to favor cameras with smaller sensors, but I will say the combination of smaller sensors and long length focal, or scopes with long focal lengths, that gives you a very, very narrow field of view. So think about a focal reducers, especially if you have an SCT. Speaking of SCTs, SCTs with Hyperstar do very, very well. But when you do get into some of the larger aperture scopes, you're more susceptible to light pollution, moon glow, atmospheric disturbances, and again, if it's a closed tube, you've got to deal with cool down. As far as mounts go, I've seen EAA done with just about any type of scope. I've done it myself with a completely manual 6-inch Dobsonian and was able to get acceptable views of the Ring Nebula. Nothing, nothing I'd want to post online or show anybody, but I could find it. So it can be done with just about any sort of telescope. I definitely recommend something that will track. Makes it much easier. This is my AR 102 mounted on a very, very old um, CG5 Celestron mount, and it works just great. It's a little bit of false color in there, but it does a great job, especially on solar objects. Uh, and my predominant scope, I use a CPC 1100, and I don't have a wedge. The software packages are amazing today, SharpCap specifically, in being able to rotate, take care of field rotation, take care of some of those streaking stars. So it's amazing what the software can do to help overcome things that if you're taking a much longer exposure through if you're taking 4 or 5 minutes of an exposure, yeah, there's no way you could do that with an alt-has scope. I mentioned focal reducers and Barlows. Very interesting. I came across a thread on cloudy nights, and I even tried it, where we stacked two of your standard SCT type reducers, and was able to get down to about basically my F10 scope down to about a 0.37. Um, reduction with pretty decent results, I might add. Um, Depending on the size of your camera, there are even the El Cheapo 1.25 inch. I mentioned Hyperstar. You can make your own, try and do a variable one. I personally am using an older Optec 3.3 reducer, and I've been having very, very nice results with it. Again, I would say you can go with just the traditional security camera. This is another picture of the Revolution um, camera in the top left here. You can see there's just a monitor there. Then we go over to one of the new Celestron Evolution scopes. Again, it's got a monitor there. But then you can see some people will bring out TVs, laptops. I love this picture of with the looks like a 12-inch or 10-inch Orion Dob with the laptop bolted on the side, and then even a really kind of robust control room, which is that bottom picture on the right hand side. Video grabbers, again, this is only needed if you have one of the analog out. I found that after I started really getting into EAA, I really wanted to start getting those views on a laptop, employing some of the technology, employing some of the software that would even make the images better than it was straight out of the camera. So that was a big game changer for me. But I did notice what would appear to be kind of random hot pixels on my screen, and they would just tend to flash on and off. And understand those were anomalies that were created by the digital analog to digital conversion through all that. Software, there's quite a bit out there. If anyone is familiar with the Malincam cameras, there is the Milestick. Um, ATEC has the Infinity software. I don't know. I know at one point, Infinity software only worked with very few ATEC cameras. I heard it's great, but never had an 8-tick camera, so I'm not sure, and I don't know how far that software has now been expanded to their other cameras. Lodestar Live is again very well touted for folks that have the Starlight Express cameras. Astro Live, it was originally an independent deal, one-man show, was in a partnership with ZWO. I don't know if it's still being supported or not. We've got SharpCap, which is my preference, very popular. There are some free versions, but even if you want to get some of the higher options, I think it's either $10 or $15 a year. I can't remember exactly, but even for that price, it's in my opinion, it's phenomenal software. And then lastly, there's something called Astro Toaster. I've never used it, but I've heard it recommended for folks that want to do EAA and they have DSLR cameras. So some other stuff that you would need to think about. We talked a little bit about the light trespasses, I like to call it. We want to make sure that we shield our laptops and monitors. And a lot of people have asked me, well, why don't you just put one of those clear, red rubylith covers on it? And my response to that is, that's great, but I'm doing EAA to get the full color of something. It's about observing now, and I find that just looking everything in a shade of red, at least for me, really detracts from the experience. So I'd much rather kind of just stick myself somewhere where I'm not going to, ruin anyone's night vision. So I employ either kind of small tents. You can see this example off here to the right. This individual actually has a curtain that'll go over his teardrop trailer over his galley and kind of block out any light when he's doing EAA over there. Or you can do remote control. So many different options. Focus masks, definitely something I think a lot of people new to EAA don't realize how important that is. Um, Automated focusers are a life changer in that hobby, as I'm sure any imager will also agree with me. Um, some sort of field power or battery box, depending upon where you're going. And I don't have it on here, but at least with my camera, I also noticed that I really needed an IR filter to really kind of tone down a lot of what I was getting with my ZWO camera. So something else to consider. And this is an example of kind of my setup. This was for a star party called ECVAR. So that's the East Coast Video Astronomy Rendezvous. And it's held in Virginia, just over the North Carolina state line. And here's my CPC 1100. It's just Alt as. There is my ice fishing shelter. Yes, that is an ice fishing shelter. I can only imagine what the manufacturer thought when some guy in North Carolina bought an ice fishing shelter. But it is phenomenal for light trespass. There is no light that comes through this. And it has a lot of windows that will zip. It even has a little venting. If it gets really, really cold, I can actually run a heater in there and that still allows for some air to escape. Um, but it is phenomenally dark in there. Um, I can have the lights full blown in there and it does not leak out. And if it ever does start to wear, it has a lining inside. I bought a red one because if the lining starts to wear, then any light that leaks out should leak out red. Um, use my solar telescope for daytime viewing. I've got my AR 102 if I want to go for some wide field views. The obligatory hammock for afternoon naps, excuse me. Got to have my outdoor kitchen. Most importantly, a coffee running off of my Coleman stove for those very, very late nights. And I don't sleep on the ground anymore, so needed the camper. So what can you expect from EAA? Again, we talked about increasing the light grasp of your scopes. I've heard anywhere from 3 to 6 times. Don't know if 6 times is really true, but I heard that said once. Great on dim objects like galaxies, nebula, and so forth. Um, I'd say you don't get that beautiful shimmer when you're viewing of open clusters. It definitely can't compete with the dynamic range of the human eye. So, me personally, I prefer to view the planets through an eyepiece than through EAA, and you won't get those beautiful photographic views that imagers would get. So if you compare my 20 seconds of exposure with on my C11 versus a processed 75-minute exposure, no contest, absolutely not. But again, it's about getting that view right there. And like I said, the examples that I'll show you are literally just screen captures, screen prints right from my screen. Uh, so again, it's important to note this is, you know, it is by no means a substitute for what I would call true imaging, um, but it can either be considered part of it or a first step. Again, we're just not doing anything with the data afterwards. So I'll share with you a few of my own examples. This was from my original CCD camera. And these are very low resolution. Basically, we're talking standard resolution, so it's in essence about 640 pixels wide by about 480 tall. You don't get these big, beautiful pictures that fill up your screen. But I'm pretty happy. I can't tell you how ecstatic I was when the first time I saw the horse head in just a matter of 20 seconds. Um, you can see clusters, they don't look all that great, but you can get color, you can get nebulosity. So to me, it's much more impressive than looking through an eyepiece. But again, it's still not going to be that, kind of, the artistic nature of what I would think of as imaging. Uh, Now with my enhanced or my CMOS camera, I'm definitely getting higher resolution pictures, a little bit nicer views, in my opinion. Obviously, none of these are post-processed. While most of those other photos here tend to, with the CCD camera, these tend to be about maybe around 20 seconds of exposure in total. It just kind of stacks, and it's always throwing away the a stack can only keep 5 stacks of these images at once, and then just constantly kind of throwing away the last one. Um, Versus with the CMOS camera, you're able to just kind of continue to stack and stack and stack. These tend to be anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes of exposures. And you will notice, especially here in the Eagle, where you've got kind of this weird, and again, I've cropped it, but you have this kind of weird gradation at the very bottom. And that's basically due to the sharp cap actually just kind of aligning and rotating um, the view. So I'm going to jump in here and kind of try and do a quick sharp cap demo. So I'm going to end the show here and bring over sharp cap. And like I said, it's my favorite tool. Typically, if anyone's not familiar with it, um, it's usually a bit daunting when you first look at it. I've got it set up so that it's reading data files of something I've already captured. It's not actually connected to my scope right now. It's just looking at frames that I captured back in November. But you typically will control your camera, set up your camera, and do whatever you need to do um, with with that. Each camera has a slightly different setup. But the big you know, uh, feature for EAA is doing something called live stacking, and that's this feature here. So I have it turned on, and what it's going to do is, and I don't know why, even though a file tells me I'm supposed to have 25 frames, I don't know why I'm not getting 25 frames. I'm only getting 2 frames, so I'm not sure why that's doing it. But I'm just telling it that my camera is it's basically monitoring the folder, and I just tell it where the folder is. One of the beautiful features, and I gotta say I absolutely love it, is this frame alignment. So it does allow me, or it basically allows me to use my alt-az scope and get 5+ minutes of exposures, as long as each individual sub exposure isn't too long. So I usually max, will do no more than about 15 seconds, only because at that point I'll start to see, even within the sub exposure, I'll start to see streaking of the stars. And you can control that alignment. I don't know if it'll actually do it here. Um, it wouldn't, but you can actually, when it's live, you can actually find which stars it's aligning on, and so forth. Lots of different features in here, enhancements, you name it. But just again, I can't say enough about the program itself. So I'm just going to basically grab. All right, so it's got all the frames already kind of stacked in it. And when you start this live stack, and again, I have no idea why it's telling me that it's not stacked 26 frames, it's only showing 2. Um, but in essence, what we'll do is provide you with this sort of a picture, and you have your histograms, and it's all about stretching the histograms to that point. Again, probably something very, very similar with all the imagers. And I actually find this to be really, really straightforward. Um, once someone explained it to me, you'll see that we have 2 different histograms here. There's this one that's part of live stacking, and then this one that's part of the display histogram. And the easy way for me to understand it was, um, this bottom histogram was basically, kind of think about, this is kind of getting your kind of your gross focus. This is the big area, and then once you have this kind of in the region you want, this allows you to make those fine tweaks, versus it was difficult to do it down here. So I find that oftentimes I can just click on this little button here that says auto stretch, and get something that looks like this. I can play around with some of the color balancing. They have certain features on that I can either pull based upon the histogram curves. It'll apply some of the color stretching, or it'll actually look at some of the background stars and try and do a color stretching there. So if I wanted to play around with how I want this to look a little bit, um, if I'm happy with that, then I can do further tweaks within the histogram settings here, and ultimately come up with a view that it's not too bad. So again, this was um, 26 frames. This is probably about might be 10 seconds or 5 seconds each, depending. Please ignore the little dust, little bubbles that are on my camera sensor here when I took it. And you can see I probably didn't have the best focus. I do believe this might have been even before I had the IR filter on the camera as well. But that's really kind of what it looks like when you're kind of playing around with histogram stretching and so forth. And I can continue to play with the colors, um, just exactly how, however I want to grab the picture. Um, Other things that are very helpful within SharpCap just in general, it does have a really good focusing tool I found. Helps align as long as you've got a batten off mask. There's a batten off mask um, reader here that will help you really get some good focus. And with me, I have a very plain, simple autofocus, or not autofocuser, just remote focuser. So not an autofocuser. So I really, really find the tool phenomenal. Um, and again, I wish I could actually step through all the different stacks and show you it as it would, basically bring in those different pieces. But yeah, so I mean, this is literally data that I captured from my front yard. Um, in I'd say probably uh, yellow bordering red light pollution in the just outside of Raleigh. So um, with that, I will go ahead and kind of maybe leave it open for questions in case any questions have come through the chat. So I will.
Oh, there are a few questions, Mike.
Yeah.
Someone asked what.
Sorry, Eric. I'm not sure. I
Yeah, I
kind of
think
cut out.
you're breaking up, Eric.
Yeah, it's probably on my end. Why doesn't someone else ask the question? It's actually breaking up coming down here too. So, but my question, one question was, Alex, could you take this?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not looking at the questions right now. I've got my own question, and then I'll go run over and look at the YouTube questions. Can one use a DSLR camera with sharp cap yet? I know a month or two there were some people really working on that. Do you keep up on it enough to know that?
I don't keep up on that, unfortunately. So
So
I don't know.
I did see on GitHub there is code that you can install and run for Canon DSLRs. And I heard that they were also doing Nikon, but when I tried it, it was a little hard to get it working. And I think I ultimately ended up not quite getting it working. But there is an effort underway for Nikon, and I think the Canon one already works. I think Canon's a little easier because their APK is a little more able to do that kind of stuff.
And
Another
if
way is
anybody
that
knows
the
that for
SharpCap
sure over
Pro,
in the chat.
sorry, well, I was just going to partially answer that question. SharpCap Pro has that folder monitoring feature. So if you could use any camera and throw the stuff into a folder and stack the files that's on that folder, so the camera becomes irrelevant.
That's a good point.
And that's good for stacking if that's all you want to do with SharpCap. But I wanted to use it for some things besides just the stacking, and it really doesn't work all that well for that. And what happened was when the COVID hit and we all had to go over to electronic assisted astronomy for our outreaches, I didn't have a good camera for putting on the back of my Schmidt cast. So I had to grab one of my DSLRs and put it on there. And they were just working on bringing out this DSLR software. And I don't know what state it's at. So if anybody out there watching the show right now would care to comment in chat as to what the status is, we'll get to it. Let's see. I'm looking for the questions. There's a lot of questions here about whether where the best wine comes from and things like that. I'm sorry about that, Michael, but you know how it
No
goes.
problem.
Diversity,
Yep.
and a reminder to hit the like button. And then some comments and questions, and no questions about the show yet. Do you know of any softwares available for the Pi or Linux?
That I don't. I know that I'm trying to think. I don't know what their ASI's new kind of or ZWO's kind of ASI Air, what that is actually on. But I don't think it's a Windows-based machine. That might. So again, it's something that ZWO has out there that will do very similar stacking. But yeah, I know for right now, SharpCap is pretty much a Windows only application. But there's definitely stuff that's out there.
Can you describe the difference between SharpCap Free and SharpCap Pro and what you have to pay for and things like, and what you get for your 15?
Yeah. So I know with the Pro version now, I'm almost positive one that gets you a polar alignment routine, which if you do have a scope with the polar camera, phenomenal. It does allow you to basically do subtraction and also apply flats. I don't believe you can do that in the free program. And what I absolutely love about SharpCap, it is so easy because once you build your library of darks, somehow it knows. And if anytime I change the gain or the exposure on my camera, and I say go, go to the darks, it sets the library up. It knows exactly where it is as long as it's close. So yeah, it's incredibly user friendly. Um, I don't know. Those are the main features that I use. I don't know if anyone else in the room has experience with SharpCap and as far as the
I,
additional pro features.
and it is $15 a year, right?
Okay, I think it used to be 10. I think it's now 15.
Where are we? Oh, it's $15 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the features, I think, can you save your profiles, your configuration profiles in the free version?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
don't. That
think
and yeah,
I think that's one of the distinctions. And really, guys, if you're going to be spending some bucks, and I don't mean to be, discouraging you if you don't have a budget, but there are some very good times to spend money. It's like it's very good to spend money when it's going to get you something really worthwhile. And the $15 for the guy making this program is not going to kill you. Okay, so take advantage of it.
yeah. I mean, it is really really good. There's a lot of support available for it. They do have a forum for SharpCap, and I think the developer is pretty responsive as well to questions on there. So yeah, for $15, I mean, considering how much we pay for other pieces of software, at least for EAA, this does 99% of what you need it to do.
You showed a couple of pictures of Dobbs, and Conrad points out that he started out his EAA adventures using an alt-as mount with SharpCap, and you can actually do that. It actually rotates as it's stacking to counteract field rotation. So
Yeah, if you go, half hour, 45 minutes, you're going to see, some really big triangles on the edges of your images. But yeah, it's phenomenal. And and if you can get a large enough resolution um, camera, then it's just a matter of kind of, in essence, cropping out what you don't want. But it's surprising how well it will do in those circumstances. Again, just like any scope, you're going to have problems with certain parts of the sky. I find that really trying to get something at zenith oftentimes is just really hard to get it to track and do everything just right.
where'd you go?
I will make another plug because oftentimes you need a computer. One of these little kind of 12 volt, or at least it runs on 12 volts, kind of mini PCs will easily handle SharpCap. I mean, this is it's a Windows 10 machine. I want to say it's about 4 gig of RAM, onboard 32 gigabytes of memory. It'll take up to 64 gigabyte SD card, and it'll run my planning software. It'll run SharpCap. It'll run my mount controls. I'm partial to Celestron's new plane wave instruments software that they have. It'll run all that, and it really doesn't kind of skip a heartbeat. Doesn't get bogged down. So yeah, I mean, it'll handle it. And that's another thing, just again, what a lot of these software programs are doing, how well optimized they are to run even on a a small little PC like this.
Linda's responded on when we were talking about rotating the field rotation and the SharpCap being able to compensate for the fact that you're getting field rotation when you're using an alt-as mount. Linda has commented that if you've got too big a target, that you're going to lose the edges anyway. Yeah, but you're not going to lose nearly as much as you think. Remember, in a typical night of deep space imaging, which is where most of us are coming from, you're going to have your image is going to go on for 6 hours. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of field rotation. particularly if you didn't have an or if you had an Altaz mount, that would be virtually impossible. But you're not doing that in EAA. In EAA, your whole imaging run may be 3 minutes long. So it really doesn't, you don't get that many different exposures rotating around that much.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating you use an Altaz mount, don't get me wrong, but it does open the door to stuff that you couldn't do
Mhm.
um, otherwise. Okay, if all you've got is an Altaz mount, a big Daub, something like that, well,
Yeah.
it'll help you.
And I mean, it does take a little bit of fiddling when you're going through the alignment or trying to get that alignment, depending upon what you set the pixel width for, maximum pixel width and minimum pixel width for stars and that sort of thing. So it's just another scenario where, as you're developing the kind of the skills to do this, especially with SharpCap, it's one of those things where you really need several nights of practice. So going to a star party or something, or having some dedicated time just to focus on one thing at a time. That was a kind of a nice thing to finally be able to really kind of nail it. So regardless of what's going on in the background, I could always get those alignment stars to show up and do what I needed them to do.
We had another question on the chat from Linda about what type of gain do you use? Do you go for the high gain, low read noise mode of the CMOS cameras, or do you go for the low gain, lower dark noise?
So it all depends on what I'm doing when. I'll usually, when I'm first doing my alignments, I've got the gain cranked up just so it's easy to find stuff. But I usually am in my particular camera, the gain goes from 0 up to 600. And when I first started out, I was right about the 50% range, so about 300. And I've been backing that off. I'm usually at about 175 to 200. I rarely play with it nowadays, and it seems to work pretty well. So I'm definitely lower on the spectrum.
The broke astronomer points out that you can use a cheapy rotator with derotating capabilities too. And I imagine you're going to know this, broke astronomer. So please respond in the chat over there. As a broke astronomer, what do you consider cheapy? What's it cost to get a derotator that you can use with SharpCap and Altaz mount?
My derotator cost me $15 a year.
Your derotation, who was that it answered right there?
Mike.
Mike, right?
That was with
That's the software that does it, but mechanically,
Yeah.
I mean, you can buy a cheap derotator. I've seen this in a couple of places lately. I don't know what that means. So that's the other. I think broke astronomer has also got a name similar to Mike. What's that cost, Mike? A broke astronomer. I mean, is $200, $500? Okay, so for $500, you can add it to your Altaz mount and your EAA rig.
Or for $600, you can get an equatorial mount.
Yeah. Anyway,
or in my case, I can get a wedge. I can get a wedge for my CPC for.
Or a wedge. Those are like $300, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay, I think we got all the questions that were in chat. And if there's anybody else has anything to ask, get them in here. Mike, how can we get a hold of you if we want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my email address is mike@astronerd.net. My website is www.astronerd.net. And on Facebook, you can also find me by searching Astro Nerd.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I encourage everybody to participate in the Astro Imaging channel. And if you've got something you'd like to share with people, I think you can go over to the contacts page over there and volunteer to present something. Several of us from the group, Linda, will be coming in during September to present something. She's one of us. There are various others of you that come in here every week, and really, it's fun to be here. You can get into the room here, and you can have some fun. So, please, we're about to wrap it up. And anything else coming in on? By the way, it's okay after the show if you would like to have a glass of wine or something. Just go ahead. Um, and that's about it for the night. So, Molly,
Thanks,
can you
Dad.
take us out?
Will do.